Joining us now to discuss the cryptocurrency market is Circle CEO Jeremy Allaire. It's great to see you, Jeremy, this morning.
Thanks.
Specifically, let's start with the devaluation of the yuan, and how much of that do you think is driving the price of Bitcoin right now?
Well, I think very clearly the overnight moves and what we've sort of just, we're seeing right in front of us right now, you can very clearly see some macro correlation there. I think the broader theme of, Bitcoin specifically, crypto more broadly, participating in these global macro forces is becoming more and more clear. Rising nationalism, rising amounts of currency conflict, trade wars. These all obviously are supportive of a non-sovereign, highly secure digital store of value, and that's clearly been a fundamental thesis here for Bitcoin and continues to play out, and it looks like will continue.
Let me ask you this. How much of it do you think it's actually capital flight out of China versus people in other countries thinking that it should be capital flight out of China? And the reason I say this is because, from my understanding, it is actually very difficult to buy Bitcoin in China.
Well, so it's clearly, the markets are global, all around the world, and a very, very significant amount of the market activity is in Asia. There are many very large offshore exchanges, in fact, with their fundamental headquarters in places like Beijing and Shanghai, but with the venues themselves in Singapore or in other jurisdictions. So there's a lot of Chinese national participation in this market through these offshore platforms. One thing to note, though, which is really important, is we have been seeing, or at least from my vantage point, a softening in the Chinese stance towards crypto. And we're seeing that in a few ways. We're seeing, for example, recently a major Chinese court, defended that Bitcoin is, in fact, legal property in China, which is significant. We've seen one of the very largest commercial banks, Bank of China, start to do proactive information marketing about the benefits of Bitcoin, the risks of Bitcoin, but more broadly, its role in the world. And then one of the largest companies in the crypto space in China, Huobi, that I believe is domiciled in Singapore, but significant operations in China, recently added a party committee to the firm, suggesting that it may be getting more alignment with the Chinese central government.
So at what point, Jeremy, would you say that Bitcoin is acting like a safe haven trade? I mean, it sounds almost crazy, right, to say Bitcoin is any sort of safe haven. But what we're seeing in terms of the lack of correlation and the correlation more to global turmoil, to that extent, it seems like it could be one.
Yeah, I mean, if you step back and you think about it, humanity has now created a non-sovereign, highly secure, mechanism to store value that can exist anywhere that the internet exists. It can exist, as we say, in a brain wallet. It's uncensorable. It's unseizable. These are really powerful attributes that I think, as people who are looking at risk assets, they're looking at fundamental turmoil. It can be a very attractive asset in that context.
Hey, Jeremy, the other question, though, is, you just talked about in China, I know you think there's a move towards maybe making it more allowable, but most of this is happening offshore. And I guess it goes back to the question we've been asking for quite some time, which is, do you believe that regulators across the board, the G7, are going to ultimately step in on a Bitcoin or not? And I'm thinking of what's happening with Libra, which would be the corollary.
Well, so we're definitely seeing significantly heightened regulator and policymaker interest in the space. That is primarily a response to sort of Facebook preparing to launch a global currency. That's obviously also a response just to the maturation in the markets, the growth of this infrastructure. It's here to stay. There are a lot of regulations in different places. They're not normalized, say, across the G20. But I think what you're hearing is clearly there need to be rules around intermediaries that deal with this stuff, security, consumer protections. The kind of rules need to be there, and that's very much the case in the U.S. with respect.
But given the decentralized nature of what Bitcoin ultimately is, can you ever create enough rules to satisfy regulators, right? That's the issue. And it's why I always thought, for example, Libra, and I know lots of people have questions and issues about Libra and Facebook and all of this, but ultimately there's still somebody to call, right? There's a centralized system where you can call them and say, guys, we need you to do it this way. Whereas in the case of Bitcoin, the best you can probably do is deal with the on-ramps and how the money is managed.
Yeah, I mean, if you treat assets like Bitcoin or assets like Ethereum or Ether as digital commodities, these are digital commodities that exist. There will be rules around the intermediaries that handle them, but the fact that they exist as digital commodities is sort of fact. I think the other big struggle here for governments is we're now entering a world where sovereigns and non-state actors are able to launch digital currencies that instantly have the reach of the internet. And so, for example, China, and in this discussion that we're having about trade conflict and currency wars and the like, China is mobilizing to launch a global digital currency based on RMB, leveraging some of the distribution power that they have with major internet and tech enterprises, in part as a response to Libra, but I think also very much part of its global strategy to expand the footprint of how trading counterparties and businesses and even consumers globally interact with China. And so China is way out ahead on this. I think the U.S. is falling behind.